everybody, it's Emily and Ben, and we are back to tell you a little bit more about love today. Ben, you want to tell us what our topic is?
Today we're going to talk about love and how it is, true love is sacrificial, that love is going to cost us something.
Right, so we're talking about how love costs us something, like that's a sacrifice. And I'm curious if you have any stories to share with us about giving something up for the sake of love.
Well, I have done that before.
Let's hear it.
So when you might recall when we were in graduate school together in seminary, I loved watching this TV show, American Chopper. And it was the Orange County Chopper was the name of the shop or whatever. They built these really cool motorcycles, and I just envisioned myself growing old and gray, riding a motorcycle my whole life, and a big one that was loud and bright and shiny. And it was apparent to me that if you and I were going to have a relationship, that I was going to sacrifice or give up that freedom of the open road and the rumble of chrome tips.
Sorry.
But
not really sorry, actually.
But I also realized that I would love to have a motorcycle, but at the same time it was worth gaining something far greater, that's you, than having a motorcycle. And so I think true love is one in which we're able to, and not even able to, but we are willing and desire to give something up for the sake of another person. And I don't feel like you ever held that over my head, but I'll say you're laughing. Maybe you did, and I was clueless. But I knew that was something that would not bring a lot of peace to your life, and so I was more than willing to give that up so that you and I might have a relationship for many years to come.
Well, isn't it too that you had money that you thought you might use for a motorcycle, but then you didn't use it for that?
Well, that is true. That is true.
That was part of the sacrifice, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of it. I did have some money saved up, and instead of buying a motorcycle, I bought a ring.
It's a lovely ring, too.
It is a lovely ring.
Wearing it.
It has brought me great joy.
I love wearing it.
It's brought me great joy.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about us, and a little bit just a funny story about sacrifice. I'm sure in your own life you have some examples of times when people sacrifice something to give something away to you. Yeah. I think also of our grandparents. Like you and I grew up with grandparents who maybe didn't have a whole lot of resources, but still every Christmas found a way to give every grandchild $20 or $50 or whatever it was. And in those cases, we see that sometimes when you give a gift, it's not the value of the gift that's the sacrifice, it's what you had to give up to give it. Yeah. So like in the example of the grandparents, $20 to me in high school was significant, but wasn't like extravagant. But for a grandparent who gave that was on a fixed income and didn't have that and had a whole ton of grandchildren, like that's a really valuable gift to be able to give that away to them. So surely in your own life you can think of examples like that. Yeah,
and these are actually, I guess financial in nature. We're talking about sacrifice. And I think sometimes when we talk about loving someone sacrificially, we think about giving something up, and that usually has something to do with a possession or a material or something incredibly tangible. But that's not the only thing, and certainly we don't want to limit our love for one another and even our sacrificial love for one another. We don't want to limit it to just material things or tangible things. And so one of the things we want to talk with you tonight about is just sort of the maybe a couple different options of what it looks like, practically speaking, to live and to love sacrificially for someone else.
Right, so the first of those ideas is we're talking about forgiveness and why forgiveness is a sacrifice. So what would you tell people, how would you define forgiveness, and why is that a way to love sacrificially?
Sure. I would say, to love someone sacrificially by forgiving them is by relieving them of the debt that they owe you. They've done something that has harmed you, that has taken something away from you, and somehow in forgiveness, we are taking what we feel like we are owed and we are relieving someone of that debt. And in actuality, it's really beneficial to us because oftentimes we're the only ones holding on to it. But sometimes I think, and I heard a quote one time, and I dug and I couldn't find the exact quote or even exactly who it came from, but it went something like this, that some situations require the generosity of forgiveness. Some situations require the generosity of forgiveness. You know, there's going to be times in your life and in my life when it is going to, true love is going to require us to forgive someone, and that's a very generous act. That means that we lay something down, our thoughts, our feelings, what we feel like is owed us, and sometimes that's really difficult. I mean, let's be honest. For some of us, we carry anger or bitterness or all these other emotions, and the reality is we can release someone of that through forgiveness, and that requires a sacrifice because it means we give up part of who we are or give up something we're holding on to so that we can offer that forgiveness.
Right, so we talk about forgiveness in a lot of ways, and about how it releases us, it releases another person, and then the base of it though is that we forgive because God forgave us first.
Yes.
Like He loves us with that kind of love that says, I'm going to forgive the debts that you have, and because I'm doing that, it's going to allow you to forgive other people. So when you find forgiveness hard, sometimes if you center yourself in thinking like, well, God already forgave me for a lot of big things, I can find some strength through Him to be able to forgive somebody else that way too. That's been helpful for me to think about in the past.
Certainly, and it comes to mind to me, Jesus on the cross. You know, his very action of giving Himself away, He is sacrificing His life so that He might forgive us, and so He's taking that on Himself, laying it down, and so that to me is the ultimate act of sacrificial love as shown through forgiveness. But even still, like the very specific instance, as He's on the cross and you know, people are insulting Him and they're spitting on Him and they stabbing Him in the side, and He looks down and He just says, Father, forgive them because they have no idea what they're doing. And so, I mean, what kind of sacrifice it requires, what, you know, to offer that kind of forgiveness in that moment really is an act of pure love that I hope one day we get to not only experience in the fullness, but to be able to give away. I think there's a whole new level of life and love and just the freedom of salvation that comes when we can experience that and give it away in the fullness. So now to kind of talk about just one other practical way of loving sacrificially, I want to take us back to where kind of we started with this series, and that was 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul in the famous love passage. Let me read you again just a short snippet of that. Paul says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures every circumstance. Paul in these words is just again reminding us what true love is. And one of the phrases that has always stuck out in there is that it keeps no record of wrongdoing, that love does not hang on to mistakes. When forgiveness is offered, it's a done deal. And so one of the practical ways we want to look at this sacrificial love is, what does it look like really to not hold on to or to keep a record of wrongdoing?
Right. I've lately been listening to a series by Andy Stanley, so some of these ideas come from him. But one of the things he talks about when he talks about love in a relationship is that sometimes we let our love start to look like expectations.
Sure.
And so when you expect somebody to do something, it kind of eliminates the way that we love, and it creates a debt and debtor relationship. So like an easy example would be if I expect Ben to take the trash out when the trash can is full, and he doesn't, it's almost like now I might be getting upset because he owes it to me to take the trash out. And if he doesn't, like that is basically like you are indebted to me because you owe it to me to do this thing that maybe we agreed you would do.
Sure.
And then that kind of means that when he does take the trash out, it's not out of love, it's out of, I'm obligated, I owe her to do this. And so that's a really tricky place to be. And a lot of times when we find ourselves in a close relationship with someone, that's happened, that we've let our love turn into expectations, and we've created this debtor relationship, so that if you constantly are owing, it becomes like keeping that record of wrong. Like you're tallying in your brain, oh, they didn't do this, they didn't do this, they did do that. I'm not gonna do X, Y, and Z until they, and all of a sudden, our love goes from being unconditional to being conditional. Like we're gonna withhold if our needs aren't met, if our debt's not repaid. And that's kind of a not great place to be, but where we find ourselves a lot of the time. And so this is kind of going hand in hand with forgiveness, like the keeping no record of wrong. Is like we have to figure out how to release the other person from what they owe to us, so that we can love out of a different place than a contractual sort of thing or an obligatory sort of thing, and just a place that says, hey, I want to give you everything. Like I want to sacrifice everything from you, even if I don't get anything back.
Yeah, and I think you just then used the term contractual, I think, and so like to me, when we get married, it is not a contract.
Right.
It's not a prenup agreement. It literally is a covenant, and when we have a and I tell oftentimes the people that I meet with before we do get married, is like, this is a Christian wedding. Like this is different. This is a covenant. This is a commitment on your side and his side and her side to go at this 100% regardless of what the other person does in sickness and in health. So when you live in a contractual relationship, there's no grace, there's no joy. It is, you're going to do this for me, and I'm going to do this for you, and we'll live happily ever after. Except that you really don't. When you live in a covenantal relationship, and this really works best when both parties are moving in the same direction. And so sacrificial love, when you're trying to outgive the other person or outgive up the other person, man, what a relationship that there can be. And so even if you're the first party to move and act on that, so be it, because that's the example that we've been given in Christ.
Right, and we recognize that this is difficult for a lot of us, to move from that place of expectation and obligation to a place of sacrifice and being able to give up. It might not happen overnight, but we believe that you can take small steps towards that. Ultimately, it's a heart change, and I think that you have to find that in the example of Jesus. We talked about him last week. We're talking about his sacrifice again this week. When we talked about him just a minute ago about forgiveness, if we base ourselves in Jesus' example and try to model ourselves after him, and even just find our strength through what he did, it might make it a little easier for us to make that transition to be able to love sacrificially.
Yeah. And so as you spend some time in your groups tonight, I hope that what we've said here has been helpful, but I hope you also hear, especially what Emily just said, that being able to love like this sacrificially, to be able to love selflessly, and as we'll talk about next week, unconditionally, this all happens when we align our lives with Christ in us. That if we don't look to Jesus as the author and perfecter of our faith, we're never going to be able to be a great husband or a great wife. Like that doesn't happen because we try harder or because we learn some new techniques. That happens when Jesus takes over our life. And so as you have your conversations, ask yourself, ask one another, where is Christ leading me? Where is Jesus leading me to live sacrificially as he is? We look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great meeting, and we'll see you then.